there's a difference between a good word and a bad word, right? So for example, I would avoid words like hitting on you or hitting on a girl. Like I've heard guys use that as an opener. I thought I'd come over here and hit on you for a minute. Awful. Why would you say that? Why would you do that?
Hey Todd, this is Junior from Melbourne, Australia. My question for you is, could you maybe give us a list of random words that we can put into our vocab just to make it more engaging, more exciting, more attractive? I feel like I have a very, very limited vocab and I tend to use the same 100 words for almost everything. So if you can help us with that, that'd be fucking awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
Okay, so this is a really interesting question and it highlights both some good and some bad ideas surrounding verbal game. First of all, the idea of using the same 100 words over and over again is it's not completely the worst thing. Now, there is this idea to quote in my wordsmithy way, I guess, one of my favorite authors of all time and one of my favorite quotes of all time, Mr. Mark Twain. He said, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. So the idea being that you change one word and you completely change the meaning, the tone, the everything of the sentence by just adding the word bug, right? So words do matter very, very much. And having the exact right word to say what you mean as opposed to just sort of skirting it and almost saying what you mean clearly does matter a lot. But what doesn't necessarily matter is using big words or special words just for the sake of using big or special words. In fact, one of the clearest ways that you can tell that someone is not particularly good verbally is when they go out of their way to use big words or try and use complex grammatical constructs or something like that, and they misuse it. So for example, one mistake a lot of people will make, this isn't related to vocabulary, but one mistake a lot of people will make is they'll say like, whom sent it over? That's absolutely categorically wrong. It's who sent it over. But the reason someone says that is they're trying to be formal and correct and eloquent. And in fact, what they do is they, show without a doubt that they just don't know what the heck they're talking about. And they actually show poor English in that context. Same thing happens when you go out of your way to try and use big words when a small word would suffice. Right? There's this whole idea in writing, simpler words are best. There's even the idea that the Anglo word is better than the Saxon word. I believe that's the English versus the English word's better than the French word is what I'm trying to say. I hope I said it the right way. I think that's correct. But the point is, simple words are best as long as they actually say what you're trying to say, right? Now, where they don't say what you're trying to say, having an increased vocabulary is good. Now, what are these special particular words that are most useful in game? Well, just having a big vocabulary in general does not necessarily translate to a game vocabulary. And there are specific words in game that are very useful. So there are words that I find myself using over and over again in game. And if anything, I limit my vocabulary from my everyday vocabulary for game. For example, the word adventurous is a word I use a lot in game. That is not a word that I use in everyday parlance. That is not a word I use in my everyday conversation because I don't really talk about adventurousness on a regular basis to my business associates or to, people like the Uber driver or whatever. But adventurous is a great word with girls for the simple reason that it means, it is very vague in terms of meaning and can be taken in so many different ways. Because adventurous is innocent enough sexually because it can mean risk-taking in general, it can mean traveling even, it can mean extreme sports, it can mean a bunch of different things that are totally fine to say and not objectionable. However, adventurous also can mean sexually adventurous, open to, trying something new, open to doing something crazy sexually, whatever. And so the word adventurous will mean in context many different things to many different girls, and she's going to take that word and mold it to whatever the appropriate feeling level she's at is. So that's a very kind of safe but ambitious at the same time word, which makes it incredibly, incredibly useful. So I like that word. There are a lot of other words that kind of maybe relate to game or relate to a relationship that there's a difference between a good word and a bad word, right? So for example, I would avoid words like hitting on you or hitting on a girl. Like I've heard guys use that as an opener. I thought I'd come over here and hit on you for a minute. Awful. Why would you say that? Why would you do that, right? Thought I'd come over here and talk to you and get to know you for a bit is way better. I thought I'd just come over here and have a quick chat is way better. Why would you say I come over and hit on you, right? Hitting on you implies that like talking to her is something you're doing to her or at her, not collaboratively with her. It also implies agenda. It implies a lot of things wrong. And so this is a case where, picking a particular wrong word is really going to hurt you. Picking a right word is going to help you. So instead of saying, let's go on a date, maybe, we can hang out and talk, or we can, chat, shoot the shit. Stuff like that is good. In describing past sexual escapades or past girlfriends and stuff like that, definitely the very vague hookup is probably better in a lot of contexts than have sex with or those kind of things. Although if you are talking directly to a girl and it's very hot and heavy, then things like to say I want to f you is a lot better than I want to have intercourse with you. Unless you're being ironical and funny and silly, in which case that may shift, right? Like if you're like parodying it or something like that. But in general, there are certain words like that you want to use and don't want to use. Also, when talking about sexual organs, there are certainly certain words that are a lot more flattering than others, and certain words that some people may even can be grossed out by, whereas other words may be arousing. So having the right word instead of the almost right word is very, very useful. But again, it's not just about having a huge vocabulary. Knowing, knowing words like, I'm trying to throw out some like SAT words all of a sudden here. Knowing like anti-disestablishmentarianism, prerogative, soliloquy, like that's not the most important thing to know in game. It really does not matter all that much. The one time where having very flowery words per se is good, there's like really almost only one time I can think of when words being extra flowery is good, is again when you're using them ironically, or when you're using them as a punchline, right? So if, for example, you were saying a punchline that was, if you'll pardon my speech, whereas if you instead said, if you'll excuse my soliloquy, it would be better. Right? It's just a little more, it makes the ridiculousness, it makes the exaggeration a bit stronger. And so for that reason, it's good. So this is the time and the place where having an exact vocabulary, having occasionally some flowery words can be good, mainly when you're intentionally indicating it as flowery. But generally the way that you're going to be perceived is not going to be because you're using big words. It's going to be because you're using the right words. And in fact, many of the best speakers and writers do not use a lot of big words. They know the big words. They use them where necessary, but they don't go out of their way to use them. In fact, this is one mistake I made when I was very young in my writing. So I had a teacher in fifth grade where it was one of the first writing assignments that I actually spent a lot of time on, and I actually consulted with like a dictionary, a thesaurus, and wrote out a lot of bigger words or words that were barely just at the edge of my vocabulary. And the teacher was very impressed, and he commented, "Ooh, you know this word, you know that word." And so I realized that the rubric for getting a good grade with him was just jam a bunch of big words into my writing, and that's what I did. And I ended up writing awful stuff. I got good grades from it, but I ended up writing just awful drivel that like was hard to read and didn't even say exactly what it was supposed to. That's not good writing, and it's not good speaking either. Again, most of good speaking is simple. All right, but that said, how do you, one, improve your vocabulary in general, and two, improve your game-specific vocabulary? So there are a couple ways to improve vocabulary. The best way probably is just read more. Read more stuff. You will improve your vocabulary. That is the best way to learn words is to read. Because you're going to learn them in context. You're going to learn the words that are useful. You're going to learn, rather than learning some random useless words that are just esoterically highfalutin, you're going to learn words that are actually used, but used well, hopefully by good authors. So that's your best way of expanding your vocabulary. There are other ways, like you can get like word of the day and try and learn it and then try and use it each day. And that's fine. The problem is, again, like the example I gave before with the whom sent it over. The problem with learning from like a word of the day type of an approach is that if you've learned the word by the definition, but not in the context, you're oftentimes going to use it out of context, right? So you're oftentimes like maybe Let's see. I'm trying to think of this. It's really, really hard to think of a misuse clever word example off the top of your head out of nothing. But maybe you learn the word like c'est la vie, right? And then you don't understand that it like has kind of a flippancy to it or something like that. So you use it in like a super serious context or something like that. And it just sounds completely out of place, for example. And by the way, c'est la vie, if anybody doesn't know, it's French. It means such is life. As long as we're working on vocabulary, it's a very useful word. Like c'est la vie, such is life, no big deal. Which is a great kind of spirit and a great attitude to have in game as well. So useful word, useful phrase, and adding a little French flavor doesn't hurt occasionally, but again, if used correctly and in the right context. If you're American English and you're speaking with a French word every other sentence, you're just going to sound ridiculous. So again, don't try and have big words just to have big words. Don't try and have a big vocabulary and show everybody your vocabulary with every sentence. Use it sparingly and use it when it is correct. Other ways to learn words well, actually, are learning other languages is a great way to learn words, because you'll learn the carryover from those languages and you'll learn the similar words from those languages. You'll also learn root words. So a good way to expand your vocabulary is to learn the words that are, like, for example, prefixes and suffixes. So like anything itis, is a medical term, etc. Or learning hypo and hyper, hypothermia, hypochondria, hyper in general, just the word hyper, and then a lot of other hyper used as I'm trying to think of hyperthermia is the opposite of hypothermia. Anyway, the point is learning those prefixes and suffixes are going to teach you not just the one word, but how to decode all these other words and understand things better. So that's another good approach. But the best approach to learning language is honestly just read a lot. And there's another side benefit of reading a lot, which is that you're going to also learn things besides language. You're going to get not just educated, but also hopefully wise, which is much more important in communication. So those are the things I would talk to you about as far as learning language goes. Now, back to game-specific words, which is probably what you all came here for anyway. You're like, Todd, why did you spend so long on that damn freaking flowery soliloquy of all the different, this word, that word, this prefix, suffix, what the heck? What about game? So again, I mentioned words like adventurous is a good word. Another good word that I use a lot in game, or have used a lot in the past in game, is trouble or troublemaker, right? Why is that a good word? That's a good word because troublemaker, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, on the one hand, getting in trouble traditionally is a bad thing. As we grew up with our parents, with our teachers, getting in trouble is like, oh, he's in trouble, it's bad, you get punished. So nobody wants to be in trouble. However, in order to be trouble, it affords someone a certain level of esteem, right? You can't be trouble for me unless I care enough about you to let you be trouble. So the idea of a girl being trouble means that you're having an emotional reaction to her in some way, or that she is emotionally affecting you in some way. So on one hand, it's a negative to call a girl trouble, and it definitely has that negative polarization of a push-pull. On the other hand, it is positive to call a girl trouble in that you're indicating she has some significance in your life or she's affected you in some way. So it's inherently, the word trouble or troublemaker is a one-word push-pull. And, when we want to be efficient in game, it's hard to do much better than a one-word push-pull. So that's another example of a good word to use in game. Let's see. What are some bad words to use in game? Would be words like my place. That's a very, very bad word to use in game. Any words that relate to things that are creepy or criminal should be left out of your vocabulary in game, even if as jokes, because who knows what might be taken seriously. Those kind of things might be good. Another good kind of principle or idea as far as words in game, this is what I use it personally at least, is to be suggestive rather than explicit when it comes to escalation. So I don't do a lot of like talking dirty to girls, at least not in the traditional way. I don't do a lot of sexting and that kind of stuff. Philosophy on that is that If the girl is into you enough to respond to sexting and sext back, she's probably also into you enough to meet up. And I have a much higher rate of closing for, having sex when I'm in person than when I'm sending my penis through the phone in ones and zeros. So I like to actually get the girl in person rather than, sext from afar. But when I do actually do dirty talk and stuff like that, I usually don't mention body parts. I'm usually not a, cock and pussy and this and that kind of person. I'm more of a caress your most sensitive area and tease you until you can't stand it kind of a person. And I think that's a much better way of going about it because it gets the same message across, but you're talking about the feeling aspect of it, the effect aspect rather than the literal aspect of it. And it's also much safer. Right? Words like sexual body parts. Some girls really like a certain word. Some girls really like a different word. And if you use the wrong word, it can immediately put. I feel that record stopping, like zzz, coming to a sudden halt. It can suddenly record stop, sudden halt her arousal. It's like, wait, what? You said what word? And it just throws her off. So I like to avoid those words that are potentially landmines in general. And I will go with the more subtle sort of feeling or effect of what's going on as opposed to the physical body part explanation. So that's a little tip as far as when it comes to talking dirty and whatnot. In general, because I've given a bunch of specific examples. In general, when you're talking about what words are good and what words are bad in game, you want to think about a couple different things. Words have their literal meaning, which is called denotation, and then they have their perceived meaning, like how they're taken emotionally, or what the underlying context surrounding them, or underlying sort of subliminal meaning almost, or subconscious meaning of them is, which is called connotation. And when you're doing things like escalating, it's a lot easier to escalate by connotation than by denotation, i.e. instead of explicitly saying it, it's a lot better to imply it because it lets the girl take it to whatever level she's comfortable with. So it automatically calibrates for you. It automatically is going to make sure that you're hitting the right level of calibration because she's going to do it for you. And then it really avoids massive mistakes. It avoids those off-putting, overbold kinds of things because if what you said was not literally over the top or not literally objectionable, but just figuratively or by association objectionable, if there is that objection, then you can always claim ignorance or claim accident or anything along those lines, or act like she's reading too much into it, etc. So it gives you a natural out, which is very, very useful. So with things that are overtly gamey or overtly escalating, prefer connotation over denotation, at least at first. At a certain point when the girl's responding really well and you want a firm logical commitment, you may go for denotation. But in general, connotation is the place to start. And this is very similar to the concept in game of change her mood, not her mind, which you may have heard before, right? Communicate with her emotional and not entirely logical, rational mind first. And then once you get a good result there, once you get a good indicator that you have permission, then you can go for the explicit confirmation on a rational level. So that's one good general idea. Other thing, just in general, in terms of, this isn't necessarily expanding your vocabulary, but it's using the right words in game, is use a lot of the words that you use relationshipy words. Here, actually, you know what? Speaking of relationshipy words, the most important word in game. You ready? Here's the most important word. It's actually two words because they're almost the same word. Is we or us? But probably we was the one I was thinking of. We or us is probably the single most important word in game. Why? Because what are you trying to create in game? You're trying to create an us. You're trying to create the idea that the two of you are together, that the two of you are a unit, rather than two separate, unconnected people. So we or us implies a connection. So if you can drop a little we into your, sorry, all the British people said, wait, he said what? If you can drop a little we or us into your conversation, then you're going to do a lot better than if it's you and me as these two separate entities. And even you and me are very important words because they're much better than what I call third-party topics, meaning small talk or talking about general ideas. So to wrap this all up, because I've gone about 10,000 different directions with it, In terms of improving your vocabulary, read a lot so that you get the ideas and the context around the words rather than just getting the words. Also, learn prefixes and suffixes rather than learning words rote, because by doing that, each prefix and suffix is going to help you to learn tens or hundreds of words rather than just a single word. So it's very, very useful to do that. However, in-game, vocabulary per se is not that important. Simple words are best, right? Good vocabulary is good occasionally for punchlines or to make an impact or something like that. But for the most part, you should be speaking simply. Trying to jam a lot of big words into your game is a terrible, terrible idea and should be avoided. And then finally, focus on the emotional words and the emotional content of words rather than the logical content of words. Again, we and us, and you and me to a lesser degree, are some of the most important words in game, and you want to focus on your connotation rather than your denotation when you're escalating, because it helps you to get your calibration right and it helps you to avoid major errors. So that's a summary of everything. Hope you enjoyed that very long-winded question. As you can tell, I kind of like words a little bit. That's why I created a program called Verbal Game, because I do get a lot of mileage out of the words I use, the phrases I use, the timing, all that kind of stuff. It's a huge, huge part of my game, and I want it to be something, I want it to be a tool that you have access to as well.